Welcome to UX, the global podcast at the intersection of research, design, and development. Sit back and listen as your hosts explore the ever-evolving world of user experience. And now, Chris Covell and Mustafa Ahmed.
So welcome to the UX podcast, Mustafa. How's it going? I see that nice new mic that you have working over there.
Yeah, Chris, how's it going? Good from my side. Yeah, just finally decided to go ahead and upgrade to a fancy newer mic. I figured since we're putting out all this great content for the world, we might as well let everybody hear us in full HD.
Coming through loud and clear, which is great. We have dueling shores. So I think all we have to do now is just worry about making sure that the things we say into the mic are as good as the mics themselves. So I think for today, it's going to be, we decided on another installment on, I believe we're going to make it now a series of maybe 3 or even 4 installments and episodes on the very important and very dense and large and sometimes confusing topic of the business value of UX. Yeah, so I think it might be good for us to maybe just do a quick recap of what we talked about before, and then maybe summarize a little bit of what we want to plan on, or at least what we plan on talking about in this episode. But from the way I look at the last episode, I mean, I think it can, as I was mentioning before, it can be a pretty dense and difficult topic to kind of wade through. I think from my perspective, I was looking at trying to think, we've had both experiences, I think, before working with business stakeholders and trying to translate what it is we do as UX people into kind of business lingo. And sometimes that works. Sometimes, that's a challenge. And I mean, one of the things I was talking about, I think last episode, was looking at UX as maybe a change in philosophy or a change in how legacy business systems or legacy business strategy is done, and trying to think about translating UX and UX metrics into, let's say, business KPIs it might be a fallacy. It's something I actually want to get your opinion on, because I think that doing a little bit more research and looking at how other people have thought about it, it doesn't really seem like there's a real cookie cutter way to take what it is that we're up to as UX people and translate it into a KPI or OKR, so that those return on investment metrics we can kind of be really sound about predicting how our work as UX people impact them. So, I mean, one of the things that I was trying to talk about that I think we're going to be talking about a little bit more is restructuring and thinking about transforming the business into a more, I would say, experience-led or design-led, and that's where the value comes from, is more of a holistic business understanding. And I know that for you were more mentioning things like shaping and changing hearts and minds, kind of on the grassroots level. So being more bottom up instead of now top down. I don't know, any thoughts on what I just kind of left on the table there?
Yeah, so I think there's quite a bit to unpack there. I guess starting with the whole how do UX metrics kind of fit into this KPI OKR kind of world. So I think this kind of goes back to the conversation we had in a few episodes ago on what is better in terms of just purely managing not just an organization but also an R&D team and measuring us against. I think KPIs are a thing of a past. I think it's an old 90s mentality of measuring what gets done. But OKRs, on the other hand, which is purely based on determining and measuring value to the business, is where I kind of see UX metrics actually fitting closest to. Now, I say closest to and not entirely, just simply because the value of UX can often take years to really, reflect and represent itself. depending on, the kind of projects or initiatives your organization is kind of focusing on. But it is something that can be, or OKRs are something that can be phrased to be more human-centered focused. And so that's where I kind of feel, UX metrics tend to align a lot better with, as opposed to just measuring, how many projects did you do this year, or how many research sessions did you run as a traditional KPI metric.
Well, on that point, actually, I'm actually want to follow up a little bit. So maybe for some of the audience members who aren't exactly familiar with OKR, do you want to maybe go into a little bit more detail about what you mean and how exactly the research or the work that we do as UX people, how that marries up or how that connects to OKRs more so than, say, a business KPI. So when I say KPI, I'm more thinking of like things like revenue or cost savings or this kind of thing.
Right. So, okay. So the way I look at an OKR is that the beauty of it is it's driven top down, and it starts with an organizational objective that the organization wants to achieve, and there could be multiple OKRs, right? So the organization could have defined a certain objective. That is, we want to be so-and-so kind of organization this year, or, start the path towards that. It could be revenue or profit focused as well. But to achieve that, they usually key results, or you could say tasks that, can be defined to achieve that objective. And now as it starts to trickle down the corporate ladder, all the way down to an R&D team, it becomes very clear that, okay, if the next level above you has a certain objective and key result lined out, the R&D objective and key result can nicely tie back into that, where it's focused in the realm of a research and design team in terms of what they can do. But from a bird's eye view, it becomes very clear to see, or clear to say, that if we achieve that, then the level above us is able to achieve theirs, and if they achieve theirs, the level above them, and so on and so forth, until it gets all the way up to the CXO level. And so, one, you get a very clear understanding in terms of how you as a team, and then you can further detail that out down to an individual level, contribute to the overall organization's success. Second, it's derived on value, right? In terms of where you could tie in design metrics really well into what those key results are.
Well, it seems like you're saying two things here, and you tell me if this is if I'm misreading it or not. But because when a lot of times I think from a legacy business strategy point of view, or a kind of management strategy, when you're thinking about KPIs, a lot of times it's very metric heavy or quantitative heavy, where it's very much about numbers. And I think what you're saying is that these kind of new objectives, so to speak, are can be more qualitative. They're not always attached to some number. For example, revenue, which I think also aligns better with how UX strategy works too, because we're not always in the business of trying to make sure that whatever we're up to change, can be tied exactly down to something quantitative. And I haven't really seen any great models or methods that can do that. But, it's more about being experimental and more about embracing learning and trying to actually drive towards maybe even more qualitative type objectives. So that's one. And then the other one, you were talking about more of like going from, top down and then bottom up, and having it all connect from like an organizational structural point of view, which is actually something I think that we're going to get into, hopefully, in the main body of this episode, which is like having a leader plugged into the C-suite level of strategy, and then having that trickle down across all the different teams, and being able to have consistency and a holistic view of of what the strategy is at the top, and then how that strategy at the bottom, marries together, so that there is consistency and a holistic picture of what research and design, and what I think me and you both agree of we're calling R&D, human-centered R&D. I think that's actually a good really important way of looking at it too, because not a lot of organizations look at it that way. But what I think what you're describing is a pretty mature organization that has transformed, so to speak, so that the R&D element of that organization is fitting together with the broader business strategy. For example, with marketing, or at least R&D, or at least UX or design, is as important. The strategy is as important as, say, sales or marketing or IT or something like that. So Mustafa, you were talking about earlier kind of the differences between OKRs and more traditional, I guess you could say, business metrics. So things like KPIs or return on investment, this kind of thing that typically boils down to revenue or cost savings, this kind of thing. So I am kind of interested to learn more, because I was saying that the organizations that I've worked for in the past, a lot of them, I haven't seen very many of them kind of on this OKR train. So like I would love to know more about how you think about it, or how you've seen it work in the past, especially too in terms of making sure that one of the things you mentioned that's interesting that I think we'll get to I think later in the episode, which is making sure that there's a consistency within the organization that kind of goes from the top all the way down to the bottom. So like, if you can give an example maybe of a OKR that would be written by someone in the C-suite level, and how that would affect, like, for example, me or you, who's just a maybe an IC person, a designer or a researcher going about our day to day.
Yeah. No, that makes that's a good question. So generally, the way an objective would be written is it would be more of a statement, right? That ideally a statement that you would like to proudly say at the end of the year, right? Like, for example, that we've become, the go-to, org for XYZ kind of needs, within the market. And that objective would then have its set of key results, right? Which are, again, measurable targets at a C-suite level that have to be achieved. And that collectively then becomes your objective key results for C-suite. Then the one downs, the next reporting managers would then write their own, key results, objectives and key results. Again, something that they could proudly say at the end of the year, with key results as measurable tasks that they would do to achieve that objective, which again ties back to the main C level, right? And so now, depending on how tall or flat the hierarchy of the organization is, once you finally get down to the R&D team, theirs would be, again, linked back to their, the level above them. But the way you would typically write one would be that, for example, for research, that we want to maybe your organizational maturity from a R&D standpoint is low, and so your objective could be that we're going to have widespread adoption and usage of the research function in this organization, right? So high interaction.
Yeah, but I mean, I think, I mean, that's interesting. I think it then gets into these, it kind of, you can keep asking the why question, eventually get down to like how, back to our original question, which I think is what we're dealing with here is not, it's not a kind of how I framed it, to begin with, I think I want to continue to talk about business value of UX, and even get some people on maybe the podcast who have done a lot of thinking about how to, approach the business value of UX, because it's like, okay, that an OKR could be like, let's spread research within the organization. But, it gets back to the original question, which is like, well, why would you want to do that? Like, how exactly does spreading research within your organization, how does that affect the bottom line, right? I mean, I've seen some models look at it like, well, if you look at UX metrics, like things like time on task and this kind of, efficiency or like, error rate that we all know and deal with on a day to day from a design point of view, how to translate that into some sort of business value, some sort of business metric. I don't know if that's possible. That's part of like what I was getting at earlier. I mean, to give you a bit of what I mean, I think that like the example that came up before, and we both know it well because we lived it, which was that innovation blueprint, issue that came up where we kind of, there was, we met with the head of product. They were interested in doing things a little bit differently, using research, wanting to kind of learn and experiment that would ultimately result in something new and result in something better. That's like the high level understanding. And, the head of product was on board, and then we wanted to test fly the idea of this, collection of methods and research that would identify problems and then seek to bring about future states. We wanted to, what happened was, we got the senior leadership buy-in, and then we wanted to test fly it within a given product. And I think the product was personal loans, right? And we met with the personal loans, manager, and they seemed to be okay. And, we had a cost and this kind of thing, but we then had this return on investment, process that we had to fill out. And what struck me in thinking about it since our last conversation was that like, there's no real way to think about what we do, which is like building knowledge, using research to build knowledge about the customer experience, and learn about that, see where the problems are, see where the opportunities are, and then seek to remedy those. There's no possible way for you to actually predict as a designer what you're going to find and what you're going to do and what you're going to correct, because if you knew that, you wouldn't have to do the research, right? So it's like building knowledge and then finding problems and then seeking to resolve them, and to like know all of that already and then tell the business, well, this is what we're going to do and this is how it's going to affect the bottom line is almost impossible, because like, you don't know what you don't know. So it's like, that's partly why I come at this problem from there's two parts, trying to mature out our practice so we're clearer and we use more like we speak with more clarity about how research and design interact and how research and design enter into an organization, because I think it's still a new it's a new discipline, and we're still kind of ironing out some of the kinks. So there's that maturity part, and then there's also transforming organizations around design or around customer centricity to that, so that all the parts are working together, so that that's another way for us to demonstrate the value. And it's almost like, instead of trying to speak in business terms, we want to go ahead and transform the business so that it, in a sense, speaks in our terms. It's almost a role reversal. So, I think partly what we're going to do with this series is actually march through some examples of how some authors have and thinkers have thought about how to transform businesses into being more design-led, into being more CX-led, and this kind of thing. And that's partly how we mature out our practice, and that's partly how I think we demonstrate the value. It's not so much like we have to speak in business terms, but we actually have to build organizations around this kind of new philosophy of experimentation and innovation, and really looking at it like, we've talked about before, really looking at what we do as human-centered R&D, and just telling the business in a sense, or trying to make them understand that it's a different way of proceeding, where it's not about always like getting things nailed down into these very clear return on investment metrics, that we're more about experimentation and doing things a little bit differently than maybe some of the legacy strategy that managers are taught, in say MBA schools or what have you. So, yeah, I don't know. Without further ado, do we want to try to maybe get into the first model, or do you have some additional thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think you've perfectly set up the segue into the first model. So I think once we dive in, we can then really fully dissect this and share our points of view.
Yeah, so there's going to be at least two models that we found that are attempting to give a blueprint, so to speak, of how organizations, maybe legacy organizations, large and small, but I think it's particularly difficult in larger organizations just because of the red tape and how large they are and how unwieldy they can be, to transform them to making sure that it's customer centric and making sure that it's design led, which is a new kind of business philosophy, or a new element within business that's a little bit untraditional. So I know that's partly why it takes a little bit of time, but I think it also, the onus is on us as practitioners to help the business understand. And this is why it gets back to my point earlier. It's like, maybe we don't speak in their terms. They want to speak in these return on investment terms, but maybe we need to start speaking more in terms of experimentation and innovation and growth terms. Anyway, but I think the first model that we want to talk about comes from here. I have the book actually. Book. I'll hold it up to the camera for those that are watching. Outside In. It's actually written by two researchers, Harley Manning and Carrie Bodine. Hopefully, I'm getting that right. And the subtitle is "The Power of Putting Customers at the Center of Your Business." Right, and I highly recommend this book to any researcher, any designer, any business person that's interested in these topics. Right, I think they do a really good job, arguing for the value of CX and the value of understanding customers and building businesses around being customer centric, which is I guess it's a novel thing. And I think we've seen it. I've seen it too, where businesses aren't really taking that mindset seriously. Maybe a good way into it, because they have, I think, 6 elements from a business transformation point of view to get it so that they say that a business is fully customer centric or fully invested in being being oriented towards the customer experience. Do we want to maybe talk a little bit about the differences between what CX is versus UX or design, or do we just see them as kind of all basically the same, like, just similar ways of saying the same thing?
Yeah, so I think we've kind of discussed this differentiation between CX and UX in our previous episode of digital first but not digital only. And the way I look at it is that, well, UX is kind of more focused. It's more on a micro level in terms of the actual interface. Like if you take digital UX, for example, it's more on the interface design, whereas CX is more on a macro level, right? That looks at it more end to end, like from the time the customer first thinks about getting, that he has a pain point and now he's going to go and look for a solution to solve that pain point, to the time when that actual solution has been delivered to them, right? Whether it is a software solution that they downloaded and finally used the service and got the benefit out of, or it was a physical product that was delivered to them, they were able to use it and get the benefit out of, right? So it's really looking at it more holistically as an end-to-end experience. And that's kind of how I would define CX. and UX. But Chris, do you think it's anything different or?
No, I think that's a good way of looking at it. I mean, I would only just kind of add like maybe one way of looking at the difference would be like what to measure if we're thinking of it in terms of that. So like, I feel like CX is, you're right. I look at it as like, as the macro view, and almost things like brand loyalty come into the picture when you're talking about CX, but then with UX, yeah, I think you're right. It's a few steps down where it's more about like usability of technology. And obviously there's a place where they can meet in the middle. But I think that, yeah, kind of moving it, separating it from a higher level versus more. And also I think UX is more technology oriented. I'd say it's more about like building and shaping technology, whereas CX, it incorporates that, but it's how all those pieces come together to build out as you said, an end-to-end experience. And I think UX is usually applied to more software, more digital. We were kind of got into that topic already. But CX, I feel like can apply, to basically any organization. It's partly why I was trying to say, earlier, like UX or CX or, this customer-centric way of looking at business is more of a business philosophy, more so than just about developing technology. So, yeah. So, okay. So that's good. I think we have an agreement there, which is nice, but they break out, and we can maybe march through these one by one, because I think there's plenty to talk about in terms to kind of take up a full episodes here. So there are, like I said, 6 major themes that pop up when it comes to getting that part right of your organization, so that it then can become fully, I guess you could say, customer oriented, or CX approved, or however you want to look at it. Maybe even look at it also from a maturity point of view, a mature CX organization. So they talk about strategy, they talk about customer understanding, they talk about design, measurement, governance, and then culture. And then so we'll go through what the authors of Outside In recommend, or what they think is the best way of approaching it. And then we're also going to look at, I guess maybe in a different episode, how some authors from a design point of view look at business transformation and what's necessary and what's needed from a restructure of your organization to make it design-led. I think it would be actually quite interesting to see where they overlap, because again, we're looking at these, it does seem like CX and UX, or CX and design, are two peas of the same pod, but just at different levels, So yeah, so that'll be fun. But yeah, let's jump into the first one, which is a strategy. We hear that a lot. There's many different types of strategy. But yeah, so when it comes to, I guess you can say, like from a high level business strategy to make it customer centric, what do you feel like that's an important element that has to run through the entire business? And also if that's true, how do we get there?
Yeah, so I think strategy, when we're talking about user experience or customer experience, I think it has to be kind of set at a more holistic level, right? Because if it's not, then it's all we're thinking about is revenue, and the only thing that really ties back to revenue from a micro level is just pure functionality, right? That is this functionality provided, and if yes, can the customer go from A to B regardless of friction, right? And if we don't sort of embed this idea of creating great experiences for customers on a strategic level, then you're never going to get the buy-in and the support in order to do what researchers and designers need to do to achieve that, right? So I think, for an R&D team to be successful, a major component of that is universal buy-in at a strategic or C-suite level, right? And if that's not there, then it won't be that an R&D team would fail, but it would just be ridiculously harder to do the stuff that other organizations can pull off only because they've got that strategic buy-in at a CXO level, right? So
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right, and I think that like these different elements, probably by design, blend and bleed into one another. So, for example, like strategy buy-in, and then leadership, and then governance, like they all kind of, you have to get them all right, and then if you get them all right, they support one another. So it becomes easier, for example, to govern your practice if you have that strategy buy-in, you know what I mean? Or it becomes easier to have strong leadership when there's a strategic buy-in. But yeah, I think that strategy is to some level like at least from focusing companies on the experience. It goes back to the discussion a little bit that we had around OKR versus return on investment, where you have to, I think, at the top level, but also throughout the whole organization, be focused on wanting to build better experiences and having a reason why you want to do that, right? And of course, it's always going to lead to revenue growth, but I think that it isn't common. It isn't always understood by every organization that if we focus on great experiences, that's what's going to get us to the promised land, right? Many times they're just focused on conversions or focused on these more I would say business metrics, right? And if you're focused on these more business metrics and the experience is not really focused on, then you're going to be creating bad experiences because there's just no focus on it. And as we both know, creating really good experiences for customers means going above and beyond, and means really doing your research and understanding the process and understanding the journey to then provide for the customers. And it does require a good amount of investment and does require a good amount of work and time to get this stuff right. And if you're not on a strategic level bought into this makes sense, we want to improve the experience, we want to care about our customers as they go through a journey, then the experience is going to be lacking. So the strategy part definitely seems to be extremely important.
Mm-hmm. But also at the same time, I've kind of seen the other side of the argument as well, where in certain industries, I mean, the financial sector is definitely one as an example, that they believe that if a customer really wants this lending product, like a personal loan, for example, then no matter what, as long as the financial metrics, like what is the interest on it, how long do I have to pay it back, how much am I going to get out of it, if those metrics are something that, or those values are something that a customer is happy with, no matter how bad the experience is, they're going to go for it, because it's either choose a poor experience but preferential financial rates, or choose a better experience with poor financial rates. And when it comes to an industry like that, where the needs and wants are very different from other kinds of industries, customers would often opt for or prioritize the financial rates that they're getting over the experience. And therefore, businesses also then prioritize focusing on that over the experience. So it's been a very interesting dilemma, right? Especially if you're a market leader, and you're doing well because you're providing convenience, you're providing ease, you're providing all these other things, but your visual experience of the product is poor. They often tend to, intentionally not opt in to improve that, user experience on that level, because they know from a pure product standpoint, given be it the interest rates or so on, they're going to be far ahead of the competition. And what we oftentimes try to convey to them is that, well, if today you don't pick up on that, somebody else will, and they'll blow you out of the water, right? Because customer behavior and needs and wants are constantly changing, right? The customers you used to service 10 years ago no longer sort of fit in that demographic that opt in for this type of product. You're now going to be serving a completely different demographic that have different focuses. And so you have to kind of adapt to the changing environment or get left in the dust because your competition decided to respond better than you did.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on something that you said and use an analogy, because I think that it's not a bad way, and I think it's typical of people breaking out experience, which is more about the journey and more about the tech and more about like if it's functioning well and if it's seamless and smooth to get to that end goal, which is, in your example, which is the personal loans. Okay, yes, people care about that interest rate. If you are able to offer a lower interest rate than your competition, even if your experience is whatever, they're still going to go for it, because what they're really looking for is just the cheapest rate. I mean, look at Walmart. I know people here in the States, you go into Walmart, the experience of walking into a Walmart, let's be frank, is not as good as the experience as walking into a Target. And some people just don't care. They want the cheapest, but Walmart's able to offer the cheapest type of service, the cheapest,
product.
The cheapest products. Exactly. So, that's the trade-off that they make. I mean, I'll give an analogy here, whereas like if you're a burger, like let's say you make pizza and that you have that best pizza in the city, let's say, you can be a little bit more. Well, there's a funny episode of Seinfeld. I actually don't even know if you're a Seinfeld fan or not.
I'm actually watching it right now.
Okay. Well, I don't know if you've seen the episode yet, Soup Nazi. But
no, I'm on season 3 at the moment. Okay.
Yeah. This one I think is it's later, season 6 where this guy who makes really great soup, and there's a line around the door, around the block, but he has this very strict way of having people order, and and if you don't do it the right way, he'll basically send you out and say, no soup for you. And, anyway, the point is that like if you have an amazing product, like people will get it. Will be more willing to put up with bad experiences, like being yelled at and saying no soup for you, or having to order in a specific way. So, to me, the experience is kind of made up of: does this provider, does this retailer, does this restaurant actually provide me with my real needs, which is getting, cheap stuff or getting a really good quality piece of, a bowl of soup. And then, so that's one element of the experience. And then there's another element of the experiences, which is like the journey to get there and going through all the touch points and going and location, if it's a physical location, or how the store is laid out and how the staff treats you. All these little micro interactions all matter, but there's two elements. And I think a lot of times we as experienced designers want to separate them and say, well, like there's the actual thing that a person's buying, and then there's the experience. But to me, it actually meshes together as one.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that, because a lot of the times the guys who are often making this argument that, oh, well, we don't have to focus too much on experience because XYZ company doesn't, they're usually referencing the top dog in the industry, right? The market leader in the industry. And of course they don't have to focus on it because they're the market leader, right? But if you want to compete with them, right? Like if tomorrow Target decides to price their products even 5 cents lower than what Walmart does, Walmart is going to respond with a better experience if they can't, price the same, because that's the only way around it, right? So
they're going to have to respond with something. That's for sure.
And experience is going to be the main thing, right?
Yeah, right. And I guess this is another problem with an issue I think with our industry too is that like when you talk about experience, it's a tough thing to pin down of what it means, because it can mean everything, right? I mean, experience is just like it's such a broad term, and it kind of does mean everything to some degree. It's that satisfaction level as a customer is interacting with your business. And yes, you're right. Like if Target somehow, however they do it, if they have the magic wand and they have the cheaper prices and they have the better in-store experience together, then that just blows Walmart out of the picture. And why would anyone want to go to Walmart unless it's like super convenient from like a location point of view? But there's another experience, right? If Walmart is closer to you than Target, but Target's a little bit cheaper, how do you weigh from an experiential point of view? Do I want to drive an extra 10 minutes to get to Walmart? Maybe if Target's around the corner, I'll just go to Target instead. It's like a calculus, like I guess each customer has to make. But you're right. Like, how does the employer, how does Target get the advantage over Walmart if Walmart just prices them out of? It just drops all their prices. They have to come up with something.
Exactly. And even to your point on location, right? If a outlet is too far away, they might invest in a digital experience. But then if your digital experience itself sucks, then the customer is not. No one's going to use it, and it becomes it just keeps going in that cycle. So I think as organizations start to like really ramp up competition, and we've seen that here in the UAE as well, right? Like we had one of the leading banks for I think the last couple of decades, has financially always done well. They've had, in my opinion, one of the worst user experiences on a mobile app you could think of, but have been dominant market leaders. And then, Fab comes around, right? The bank that you and I both work for, with a far more superior experience to this competitor. And now this competitor has finally responded with a fully refurbished app, right? They finally bit the bullet. They finally realized that it's hurting them because their biggest competitor's got a far more superior digital experience. And now they've invested everything into rolling out this brand new app with a shiny new experience. And, it clearly shows they've invested a lot into R&D to overcome the competition pressure. And so do you as an organization want to sit around and wait for the big fish to roll up and surprise you? Or do you want to become the big fish and continue to hold your ground because you've got a superior product and a superior user experience? And I think that is a strategic decision that answers the why of why we do what we do, that has to be answered on a strategic level, and for the other functions across the organization to kind of follow suit.
Yeah. So moving out of the first element, which is strategy, and then into the second element, which is customer understanding. I mean, I think this one, is probably going to be a theme that we've already touched on, that we're going to continue to touch on, because we both come at UX, come at the business innovation from a research point of view. That's kind of our day jobs. So, but I think it is important for us to continue to make the case about having a customer understanding mentality within organizations, any organizations. And, there's a few things that we can talk about here as why businesses, if they want to become, let's say, more design led, or if they want to become more customer centric, why they would want to bring on a team of experts who can understand the customers and help them figure out what's going on, what the behaviors are, what the attitudes are. And I think that this is actually, I mean, it's maybe easy for us to justify or to explain, but I think that it does, again, maybe going back to a theme that we're going to continue to kind of harp on here, which is like what we're up to and from a UX design point of view is a radical way of looking at how businesses operate and what traditionally is done. So I think one way into this, like why customer understanding should be a key and important element of becoming design led and restructuring your organization so that there is a customer understanding team or group or element and a collection of experts who can do this for your organization, which, I mean, it's a very simple one, which is like, and I think it actually gets at the heart of why this, the book that we're talking about is called Outside In, which is you have an organization that's serving a whole bunch of your potential customers and actual customers, and you're trying to take that, who they are and what they think and what they do, and bring that into the organization, right? And only through that constant understanding and constant collection of data to get a sense of who they are and what they're looking for and how to segment them and how to ultimately satisfy them. You, as let's say a team of management or C-suite or something, you can have hypotheses about what they're looking for. You can have hypotheses about what their attitudes are, but there's no way for you're not a soothsayer, you're not a mind reader. And if we at least admit that much, that I don't care how smart a person is, that when you're designing offerings and when you're trying to figure out what those offerings even should be, if you're not using research, you're just guessing.
Yeah. I totally agree, right? Like, and I think a lot of the times, some of the worst products we've ever seen go out into the market from any industry have been a lot of gut feelings and C-suite sort of forcing certain decisions, or not even C-suite for the matter. It's just somebody who had a decision-making power forcing that decision on just because he or she had a gut feeling that this was going to do well, right? Without actually really testing it with the market. And I think a very good example of that was the Sonic the Hedgehog movie, right? So for those who will know this story well. When the trailer for that dropped and they for some reason decided to design Sonic in a more human manner, it was complete and utter outrage on the internet, right? Clearly, that design was not tested or checked with a focus group or a collection of folks who are die-hard Sonic fans, right? Because those were the guys ultimately on the internet absolutely having a meltdown of this design, which finally resulted in a complete rework and delay of the movie, where they redesigned the character to be more accurate to the source material, and that's what actually resulted in an uptick in sales and the success of the movie. So thankfully they reacted and saw what customers were finally saying. But in most situations, even after dropping a trailer like that, they could have proceeded with releasing the movie and then seeing the financial loss that would have resulted in that. So I think that's one fantastic example on how customer research and really understanding your customer and what they want out of your product at the end of the day really helps shape and drive the end product, because that then finally leads to the financial goals that were originally set out for the production company.
I think that I'm probably pretty biased here. I think we both might be quite biased, but I think that actually the research explaining and justifying having a customer understanding component in your business and every business is actually much easier than justifying and explaining having like a design a design studio or a design function within a business. I would guess that both of them are equally maybe valuable, but I think from a way to like actually explain it for like a layman, for someone who doesn't do it on a day to day, I think for me it's much easier. I would even say that if I was a designer, I think explaining research is actually simple, because it really is about looking at like there's no way that one individual person or a group of people can fully understand what all the different intricacies of what their customers are doing and what they're feeling, what they're wanting, this kind of thing. So
yeah, no, so I think it is true. It's easier to get that in place a lot quicker and a lot easier, and there are many organizations doing that in terms of talking to customers. But what I have noticed is that the way they talk to customers is more about, oh, I'm calling because, you use so-and-so service and I just wanted to hear your feedback. And they have like very scripted questions like, on a scale of 1 to 10, this, that, like it's more of, I often call it donkey work of just picking up the phone, calling people and asking them to give a score on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5. It never really goes into the depth of understanding of why a person does what they do and where the challenges and feedback really stems from. And that's ultimately the role of a researcher to kind of fill in. So to just say we're talking to customers is not the same as we're doing UX research. And I've noticed from my experience, from my career, differentiating that to senior management has been a challenge because they think research, if you've already got that piece in the organization, they think research is just doing that, right? And that it means that, okay, now complaints management and all these kind of functions and divisions that already exist are now going to fall under research, which is not the truth, right? Research does sort of play a role in that, or UX researchers do play a role in that, but it's not the same, right? That's very different from what a UX researcher actually does and the kind of value they actually bring to the table. So shifting that mindset that research is a lot more beyond just your traditional customer complaints and support kind of folks is where a bit of a paradigm shift is required, again, both on a tactical and strategic level.
Yeah. And you brought up what we don't do is just talk to customers. And I think that another thing that we want to also, champion or push is also, I think what we also don't do is just giving customers what they want, right? I think that it's more about it, and you're right. I think that there is a fundamental misunderstanding in many cases about research. Hopefully, they can, that understanding, through conversations like this, through, more research kind of entering organizations, through, research growing. Hopefully, more, more things being published, more kind of consciousness raising that, what research is actually up to in many cases, especially up front before there's actual products or, not just downstream when we're trying to test things or just trying to see what's wrong with a given experience. But it really is about, and something we've talked about a lot, which is like building out current states, trying to get clear about what's actually the facts on the ground, sketching out a map of the landscape, which will really, I think it's a way of getting everybody on the same page. It's a way of aligning teams. It's a way of being cross-functional, right? Those maps that we sketch out as service designers, researchers, are really valuable because they're not based on gut assumptions. They're not based on what one stakeholder thinks or what one senior manager thinks. They're based on actual data, actually going out and making observations and talking to people, and then synthesizing that and creating these maps. And those maps are so valuable because you can then really get strategic about your design. You can get really strategic about what you want to change. You can get strategic about how R&D happens, I think that changing that consciousness about research and making sure that senior management knows that what we don't do is just talk to customers, and what designers or what R&D doesn't do is just give customers what they want. It's much more methodological, and it's much more about being. And it gets back to, I think, something we were talking about before, which is like it's a mindset shift for businesses to be open and embracing differences, challenges to what they think is actually occurring through evidence and data. And that evidence and data, that is where the researcher is living, right? That is our bailiwick. That is our what we bring to the table, and having that mindset, which is the UX mindset, the design mindset, which is evidence-based and, empirical and, experimental. And the experimental, piece is more about, testing new prototypes, this kind of thing. But at really what's driving, the driving factor, the driving force behind design and behind being human-centered and, customer-centric is, I think, learning, is being open to having your assumptions challenged by researchers about your customers, and that's not something that, I've worked for companies that don't really take that seriously. And I think that is a fundamental mindset change. So, okay, so I think we're both on the same page that customer understanding, go figure, customer understanding and research is important for organizations. I'm sure many people could have guessed that one from the start. But moving on to the next, pillar that they talk about is design. Full stop. They just and I think in the book they really bring up. Following double diamond, being experimental, prototyping, iterating, working agile, all the things that businesses sometimes, or most of the time, struggle with trying to fully embrace. Because once again, like we were saying, a lot of times businesses are not built, they're not structured to have this way of working, right? To have designers kind of coming up with prototypes, testing things, bringing in customers, being innovative, changing strategy midstream. I think that a lot of times business people don't. It's like they're not used to it, right? And for anything that the people are not used to, it's tough for some people to really embrace and really get behind. You have some people who are like champions immediately. They see the light. They're switched on individuals. But that I think that those are people are not the majority. So yeah, I think when we talk about design in an organization, I think it's an easy way of saying what that is just going straight to design thinking. I think. And maybe I'd like to get your take on this too, because I think design thinking is actually from some of the podcasts I've been listening to and from some of the conversations I've been having, with other professionals in the field. I think design thinking, at least within UX and design, is actually a controversial topic. And I have some reasons why I think that. But first off, in terms of the element that the authors are talking about, so design, what does that mean? What does that mean to you from a structural point of view, from how to reorganize your organization to make it more centric from a design point of view?
Right. So, the way I look at it is that the design component goes beyond just creating visual pieces, right? It's more about how do we solve problems, right? And empowering teams to solve problems in new ways is ultimately the layman's definition of innovation, right? To not just play catch up with your competition, but also to push boundaries and go beyond what everybody else is doing, and That is to innovate and come up with something new, something greater, something better, right? And it could be customer facing. It could be also just purely benefiting the internal organization. At the end of the day, both pieces or both ways of achieving this would ultimately tie back to that organizational OKR that could be set, right? So having a design function in place that is built around solving problems is empirical for the success of any organization. Now, it might be that the kind of projects or kind of tasks or things that you have to work on might just be pure visual design for prototypes, because that might just be the majority of projects running. But at the same time, it could also be, how do we improve our operational efficiency in an organization? How do we work smarter and not harder? And so that's kind of where I see the function of a high performing design team sitting, that they work much broader and across multiple disciplines than what most people would, or most business folks would interpret design as, So that's my take on, the importance of having design in an organization, especially that is, constantly trying to push the bounds and also compete in this landscape where every other org is now investing in the same type of resources and capabilities.
Yeah, and I think to kind of jump off of that and add to it, if we look at how organizations and enterprises are structured from a historical point of view, design has not been something, I think, that has been a part of the typical structure of, talking about, for example, marketing or sales or IT or this kind of thing. It's just something that's a new, it seems like it's a new element, a new vertical within the broader business context. But I think, and I think you would maybe agree with this, it does deserve to be to have its own vertical. It does deserve a place at the table. And, this is something we hear in the industry. You look on LinkedIn, et cetera. You always hear people, UXers kind of complaining about not having a seat at the table. That it's a bit of a vague term. And I think it can mean different things to different people. But I think one of the things that people mean by it is having design really be relegated in a sense compared to some of the other more legacy pillars or legacy functions of a business, for example, marketing.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know if the designers are really given that prestige as of yet. At least some of the organizations that I've worked at, I don't think that's the case. But and a part of it is looking at design from a business lens and a business context, that it is different, I think, than most, if not all, of the other functions that make up a business. One of the things that's a core component of design, so to speak, is being experimental. This is what we've talked about this already.
Yeah.
And is being evidence-based. And is being creative, and this kind of thing. And, I think that is a new mindset change. It's a different way of working, and it becomes sometimes difficult. And this is maybe we'll get into ways to try that other elements of becoming design-led or becoming customer-centric from an organizational point of view that are necessary for design to kind of flourish within an organization. And I think one would be leadership, because, having design come into an organization and try to build a reputation from the ground up, grassroots, without having that top-down individual to mandate certain things from a structural point of view is very tough, because in many cases, it's a new way of approaching certain problem solving. It's a new way of again, being empirical, being evidence-based, looking out at your customers, being methodological and experimental as you're moving through a process to get to some end result. And typically, I don't know if very many businesses really operate in the way that designers want to operate, So That is I think a core component of becoming customer centric, no doubt. But it's not surprising that without top down management, it's designers struggle.
Yeah. No, I think I think you're right when saying that there is a bit of a methodological or mindset shift that's required to really start looking at challenges and problems the way a designer does. And a lot of that has to go with the fact that that designers, good designers, inherently see the world from a design thinking lens, right? They really start to try to tackle the problem on a root level by empathizing with the one that's suffering, or the individual or groups of folks or whoever it is that is facing the challenge that that they're trying to solve. And it means that you ultimately kind of leave the how part to later, and you first start to really try to understand the why, of why a customer or why an individual is trying to do what they do, and where is it that they're really struggling, right? And that allows you to really try to fundamentally change how that solution is either built out or how that solution exists as of today, right? For it to pivot and transform to something that really starts to solve the problem from the ground up, as opposed to just stacking on your little solution on top of something that is a bit of a wonky, shaky tower, right? So I think if more business folk, both business and technology folks, start to look at it from that lens and from that approach, they're going to be better positioned to really start to innovate, because that is the core fundamental ingredient required for innovation, and start to then push the bounds, as opposed to just checking off a task that, I fixed X, Y, and Z, right? You've probably fixed it for now. You've probably fixed it for, the time you're here working in this org, but it's going to become sins of the past that the next person adopts, or issues that start to creep up again in the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah. And, I think that also it goes back to trying to demonstrate the value of design and demonstrate the value of UX, is that we need not only to try to mature the practice and to make sure that the practice is making sense, and to make sure that it's growing and getting and becoming more, having individuals come in with more acumen, and having individuals come in with a better sense of how design fits within an organization, but also to restructure organizations if in fact the organizations want design to come in and be successful. Instead of thinking in terms of, okay, business value of UX, well, let's try to think about what's the return on investment? How do we tie metrics together? That is maybe one project, but another, probably why we're discussing this today is reorganizing the organization so that designers can come in and actually do the type of work that they do, and have the freedom to actually be designers and actually follow their processes and to deliver value in that way. Because if you have designers coming into an organization that's not structured properly, that's not structured in a way that's conducive to the work that designers do, you're setting them up for failure, And if it's so you will never be able to demonstrate value if you don't have that ability to have designers have the tools, have the techniques, have the freedom, have the space, have the buy-in that they need to actually be able to deliver on projects, right? And if you're putting them into boxes and you're not allowing, and you're seeing them as almost as servers or something like that, or not seeing them as, not giving them a seat at the table, so to speak, you're going to set designers up, I think, for failure. I mean, this is maybe a topic in and of itself that we can discuss later, but from a historical point of view, I think design is, in particular, usually always been in agencies, where you have organizations bringing in agencies and scoping out, individual pieces of work, and that separation maybe was a good thing. And I would love to get some people who work in agencies or who lead design at agencies and see how the problems that they're going through, and to see if there is a correlation or an overlap between the problems that people who lead design in organizations actually embedded into enterprises. See if there's overlap, or if there's a divergence in what the problems are. But I think if you're going to be an organization and you're going to want to build out a design practice and not have to rely on agencies, and not be constantly just hiring vendors and this kind of thing, and really have an in-house practice, you have to really buy into it lock, stock, and barrel. You can't just kind of do it half-ass. If you do it half-ass, you're going to really set up your designers to have a lot of pain and have a lot of confusion, have a lot of dysfunction. And I think ultimately you're not setting people up for success, So I think that I think that this conversation that we're having is extremely important to try to get organizations to restructure around having a more customer-centric, more design-focused outcome. And as we'll see, I think moving forward when we talk about the McKinsey article, and even in the book that we're talking about now, they've cited a whole bunch of literature and a whole bunch of research that show when these organizations restructure to be CX focused, or to be UX focused, or to be design focused, it does actually translate. There's lots of hard evidence that translates that these companies become successful from a return on investment point of view, from a bottom line point of view, from a success in the stock market point of view. So, and the proof is in the pudding, right? So but what I think is what can happen is you can't have, let's just test the waters with these UX people. Let's bring in a couple people and, see what they're up to and see what they're doing. And then maybe, in a few years, maybe give them some more money to see. I think what we're kind of getting at is that this stuff has to really be baked into the organization's DNA. And without that ability to have this customer-centric, this design-led DNA within the company, you're going to have, the company's going to look at these designers as kind of like antibodies and attack them instead of trying to embrace them. If we want to take the kind of like a more of a biological analogy. I think maybe moving on to the next element, is there anything else you wanted to say about design as being integrated into the larger business focus?
Yeah, no, I think you've brought up an interesting point on how design agencies tend to do work very differently than regular organizations, and then how organizations are reaching out to these design agencies to come in for certain pieces of work. I think there's quite a bit to unpack there. I'm going to intentionally leave it for another episode, because I know we've got an episode planned with a guest who's coming in from that world. So I think I'm gonna save my points for then, and let the folks listening in sit back and wait for that episode to drop.
Yeah, no, probably for the best anyway. To begin to unpack that one, because that's something that listening to like the history, kind of getting more educated on the history of our discipline. Mm-hmm. There was a time when a lot of what we did, a lot of the work that we're doing now, was not something that really organizations wanted to focus on or wanted to care about. They would just outsource it. But I think that time has changed, and this might be partly why we're having a little bit of growing pains with organizations in trying to bring on these more creative agencies and have that situated within the greater whole. But that requires some concessions, I think, too. You can't just you have to be able to build it out, and you have to be able to do it the right way. And if you can't do it the right way, then how do you demonstrate? How are they supposed to demonstrate value? But yeah, I think it should be. Let's kind of put that one on the back burner for now.
Yeah.
This is another one that's interesting. I think measurement they talk about, right? And I think typically when they talk about measurement, this is another, I think, area where research matters. I mean, in many cases, people look at UX research primarily as qualitative and primarily happening within, I would say, like the product and the design sphere. But I think looking at measurement as just more research, more being more evidence-based, being able to track how your customers are feeling, how things are performing, is just a different way of, just a different side of the same coin of what we were talking about with customer understanding, right? And I think one of the points I want to make about measurement too is what I would want to see changed is, we look at kind of the typical measurement metric that we hear all the time, wherever you go, is this NPS score, where,
don't get me started.
where let's just take a measure of the NPS and that'll tell us everything that we need to know. And I feel like that is really not a sound. It just doesn't hold a lot of water, no matter which way you look at it. Right. And I think having a more structured and a deeper understanding of how to actually measure your customers and their satisfaction level is something that is actually very important to, it's funny. It's go figure, to get a more customer-centered organization and to be more design-led, you want to learn more about your customers. And as we were just talking about before, how do you do that? Well, it seems like research is your ticket to your ticket to that knowledge. I don't really know any other way that you can actually learn and know about your customers other than using the methods of social science and data analysis and methodological interrogation and investigation. That seems like that's the golden road.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest what really grinds my gears when it comes to NPS is that they kind of look at it as just a one-stop shop kind of metric to say that whether we're doing good or we're doing bad. And just to echo some of your points, I think it's so much more than that. I think it is a nice metric to have on a business slide, but if that's the only thing you've got, then you're doing something horribly wrong, right? The analogy I've often used to kind of steer people away from just looking purely at NPS is that if you as a business or a product owner, you're a pilot, right? You're sitting in the cockpit. And if the only dial you had in that entire cockpit was the NPS score, you have no idea of whether the plane's actually functioning properly or not, right? You've kind of got an idea whether it's good or bad, but you don't know where the root cause of the problem is, right? Or you don't know what is actually doing amazingly well, or what needs to change. And that's kind of where, the role of a researcher really comes in to go beyond just the basics of good or bad. And that often, to go back to my point earlier, that's what makes us different from just a complaints department, that's just hearing from customers on whether they had a good or bad experience, right? And through research, you can actually then understand on a fundamental level that what are some of the overarching holistic changes that are required to actually shift that score in the right direction. But to just use that score as a means of saying we're healthy or we're not is not the safest way to kind of, decide the fate of your business. It's really putting all eggs in one basket and hoping that the customer is given a true understanding of what their experience was like, even though it could be super isolated to just one part of the entire ecosystem map. of a customer's experience cycle.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's flawed. NPS is flawed in so many ways. I mean, I've seen it used where even the question itself doesn't make sense in the context of what you're trying to find out. Like there's times when I've seen NPS asked about products that don't make any sense in terms of why would anybody recommend X, Y, and Z? Like it just the logic doesn't work. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to think of, there was one, for example, some internal system. I think it was like Teams or something like that. Right. And, a big organization that I was working for changed from whatever they used before, the legacy, into using Teams, and to get a sense, to take the temperature of whether that's working or not, or is it, are people satisfied? They asked NPS, but it's like, if you just stopped and thought, okay, are people recommending Teams to other people? Like it's the only option they have. Why would you recommend it to, it's just things like that. Like it's just being a bit like thinking about it. Like, we talked about thinking about what is the context? Okay. How do you get more information and the root causes of this given area of investigation that you want to learn more about, right? It's about learning and experimenting, and you got to be always custom and tailor your research questions to the given area of investigation, and say this is in bounds and this is out of bounds. And if you're just going to use some generic measure like NPS wherever you want to shine light, that's not going to tell you very much. I mean, it's not a very professional, it's not a very advanced way to investigate and learn about learn about the current state, and learn about what you need to do, and what needs to happen, what's working and what's not working. I mean, the other thing too, kind of looking at what the authors are talking about in terms of what they mean by measurement. They talk about descriptive measures, perception metrics, and then outcome metrics. And in each of these buckets, the way that they feel like that you capture these customer-centered measurements are pretty much through quantitative measures. So I think that it does open up the question too to the connection between user experience research, or at least if we wanted to make that a little bit more narrow, like qualitative type interview / ethnography, and how to combine that with more analytics. And I think that once you're able to combine those kinds of qualitative research methods with the quantitative research methods, I think that harmony is really where you can really get a great sense of what's happening, why is it happening, and then that sets you up to really be able to move straight into the solutioning space.
Yeah, I think that's extremely critical, right? Like if I remember going back to some of the projects you and I worked on, I think the ones that really cracked the question and really uncovered a lot for us when we were compiling those reports was when we did this sort of combination between qual and quant, right? Because it just really helped put a whole picture together. And I think purely from a storytelling standpoint, when playing that back to business stakeholders, that was the winning formula, right? That if we had the luxury of time and resources, that would be the approach we'd apply on almost every other kind of project we'd work on, right? But just going back to these three different metrics you mentioned, and I guess for the folks listening in who may not know what each one is, do you want to kind of give a description on?
Yeah, let me do my best to try to give it, because I definitely wouldn't consider myself to be an expert at how outside in approaches CX just yet, but I think the way that these authors are conceptualizing measurement, like I said, it's quite quantitative based, and it's very much, I think, using analytics and using surveying to make sure that the company is tracking on all levels and from all angles. Maybe even another way of looking at it more from a UX lens, which is like benchmarking, making sure that there's a system in place that as offerings are being rolled out to customers, or and that there's constantly data coming in and being processed, so that when an issue flares up, the people who need to know about it, and then maybe that when that issue flares up, then you can build a team around that issue so that then it can get redressed. But to give you some more, some more insights to kind of how they're talking about. So they call it the three types of customer experience metrics. So descriptive metrics, they'll say the fundamental question is what happened, and I think that this is like data science and analytics. Common metrics that they mention are things like website visits, average pages per visit, average call time to call centers, this kind of thing. And the data sources that they bring up are like CRM systems, web and mobile analytics, call center log data, this kind of thing. There's probably you can also add telemetry to that. Just kind of these data sources that are just running in the background, constantly monitoring customer behavior. Then they move on to perception metrics, and the key, I guess, question there is, what did the customers think about what happened? So it's, I guess, more maybe in the why space, which is, okay, we have this behavioral data, but then we can also survey people and get their perceptions about what they like, what they don't like, right? So there's a kind of that fundamental difference. And then the third, which is outcome metrics. And that's a kind of a combination of that you can either use surveys or analytics, which is more about outcomes of what will customers do as a result of what happened. So, things like they complain to friends about the faulty billing. They won't purchase because of they won't based on what happened. This is what they're going to then do. So they won't come back. Loyalty will be will reduce. They'll defect. The likelihood for them to recommend will drop. So I think outcome metrics are maybe a way of, I'm kind of now looking at it, is a severity, meaning like if this issue is happening, if we've detected this issue, there's an outcome that's going to happen. Is that outcome good or is that outcome bad? Right. So it's a way of almost putting like a moral, like a good or bad valence onto the data.
Right, but also understanding the degree of severity. The degree of severity and if the degree is high in a negative, then it's something that needs the company's attention. Mm-hmm. So that's how they kind of break it down. Is there anything that you would want to add to that? I mean, I think one thing I would say too is, I mean, you can do a lot obviously with really great analytics folks, with really great data scientists, with really great survey scientists, this kind of thing, data mining. If you have that team in place, I mean, a lot can be, processed, and you can learn a lot, and you can really get very clear about certain issues if everything is tied up the way that it needs to be tied up. I would also maybe just add some qualitative research that could happen, where if the analytics team is showing something that's particularly troubling, to get some UX researchers on the job, so to speak, and really get deep into understanding the motivations as to why that's happening. One of the things, I think one of the projects we worked on, right, without getting into too much detail, was the analytics team I think found that there were employees at the bank transferring money out of their account every time that it came in. And I mean, the analytics will tell you that that's a problem. The bank wants to keep, it's a business issue. The bank wants people to keep their money in
with Fab, with the bank. But, if 70% of the money after people are getting paid with their employee accounts is getting transferred out, that's a big issue. And Fab wanted to know why. And I don't know if there's any real data sources that you can collect that will, from an analytics point of view, that will tell you why. I think the way that we approached it, right, which was what you talked about before, was we decided to start talking to people, really building out an understanding of what's happening from a conscious and maybe even subconscious point of view. What are the fears? What's motivating that type of behavior? And then once we kind of got a broader and better picture of the different types of reasons why people were doing it, we then sent out a survey to really shore up and get confident about what are those main reasons, to then help the business to say, okay, well, this is what we know. We've gone through this methodological process of understanding why it's happening from a qualitative and quantitative point of view. And this is why. And now it's up to you. We can help you, but it's up to you to kind of make these adjustments. Here's where the recommendations come in. We can make these adjustments so that it stops happening.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's pretty much what happened.
So what do you think about the measurements? Do you think anything's missing? Or, being kind of a data, gearhead yourself, would you like to see any other kind of types of measurement systems being implemented? Or do you think that the outside in kind of did a good job capturing?
I think it's a pretty comprehensive set of measurements, right? Because it's, it does sort of lean in on business value as well, right? So it's goes a little beyond just being pure UX measurements, and that you're able to now quantify it in a way that is more contextual and relevant to business stakeholders, and ultimately bridging the gap between design and business, to say that if these metrics are improved, through it could be through design changes, it could be through technology improvements, could be through business models itself evolving, then you can start to see a higher score against these metrics, which ultimately then would correspond or contribute to things like revenue, reducing operational costs, and so on, right? And ultimately for us as designers, our main metric at the end of the day is delighting the customer, right? And so if this gets baked on a strategic level, it becomes very easy to achieve now all three of those things by kind of looking at these more underlying low-level metrics or means of measurement to start to stitch a story together on how certain proposed changes or ideas can really start to shape the performance of the business as a whole.
Okay, cool. So moving on to I think the final two elements of transforming an organization to make it more mature from a customer experience point of view, whether you want to look at that from a CX or UX or somewhere in between those two acronyms. The way that the authors from the book Outside In categorize the things that organizations should be focused on. The final two elements are governance, which I think is an extremely important one that is not talked about nearly enough in podcasts or in books or in organizations or on LinkedIn. And then culture, which is sometimes, I think, most of the time hard to talk about. It's pretty intangible. But I think we can try to do our best to make it more tangible, because I think things like hiring practices and promotions and, I think actually this is where maturity levels really come into play. Whereas when you have UXers, when you have individuals, when you have teams that are very mature and building out and and wanting to be taken seriously, that's part of a greater UX, a greater CX culture. That can really then help influence the business and influence buy-in. But I think first we want to talk about governance, and this is something that I'm spending some time, a lot of my time actually now thinking about too, because I think, we hear about evangelizing, something that from the very beginning, my first job in UX, when I was interviewing, it was always in the job description about how, part of the job is to evangelize, part of the job is to try to get buy-in. And, to some degree, I'm getting a little bit tired of the phrase. And I think we need to maybe begin to, instead of be focused on evangelizing, because that brings up certain connotations, like we're chasing people, like we're trying to convince them, we need to demonstrate our value to them. And when we do that, then we have these converts. And I mean, does a marketing person need to evangelize marketing? I just think that there's a shift that needs to happen, possibly, which is, and it comes with leadership, and which is, instead of being this more like bottom up grassroots, let's convince individuals and let's convince stakeholders that this is what they need. It should be a little bit more top down, and that's where governance comes into play, where we have standards and practices and principles and methods, and we're going to be mandating that, this is happening from a company-wide point of view. And I think that just changes, honestly, I would like to get your take, but I think that just changes the whole tenor. And it changes the whole, it changes the conversation, and it changes instead of chasing people and saying, we want to evangelize our practice and we really want you to buy in and please like us. It kind of switches the conversation a little bit to more about, we're an organization, and this organization is bought into design, and it's bought into being customer centric. And we're going to put in practice. We're going to put in standards and practices so that everybody knows that this is the way. This is the operating model, and it's a bit more top down, and it's a bit more heavy. Heavy handed. I mean, that can sound kind of, I don't know, a little bit tyrannical. But I think being too much of, hey, this is grassroots. Hey, having senior leadership not really be pushing for this type of thing and shirking the responsibility down to ICs and just dropping researchers on teams and then saying, hey, researcher, it's up to you to evangelize. I don't think that's really helpful. And I think that that's causing a lot of pain and dysfunction within the field.
Yeah, I think I kind of share the same feelings about evangelizing. I mean, the way I look at it today, it's I describe it as more of a necessary evil at this point, or maybe not evil, but a necessary thing that you got to do, even if you don't like to do it, right? Just because, if you fundamentally look at it, right, your C-suite, the guys who sit at the top are in their 50s or something in a more mature, larger organization, right? These are guys who've kind of spent the last 30 something years of their career.
If you're a 50-year-old CEO at like a large organization, you're like a baby,
Yeah. but yeah, they spent the better part of their career working in, certain departments and so on. And, they've probably come with some sort of business degree, where they learned about, the functions of HR, functions of finance, functions of marketing. So a lot of those things are embedded to them in their university years, right? They graduate, they start their career, they're working in all these different business functions, interacting with folks from all these different functions, understand and can see the value of that. And then they finally get to a position that's a little bit more bird's eye, right? And probably halfway through their career, that's when the sort of this, I like to call a bit of a design revolution started, where design started getting a lot more prominence and notice. But it does not mean that design was done right on day one, right? It took many years for it to, as a function, to finally get to point of perfection. Actually, perfection also is not the right word to use, but to a point of acceptability that this is how design studios and research teams should operate, and this is what the value they bring, right? So we're talking about senior leadership that has, only been exposed to good design practices for a fraction of their career. And those senior leaders are far and few, because not all organizations have implemented R&D in the right way, right? So they've probably also seen a lot of failure stories of R&D teams, right? And so the way I look at it is that a chief marketing officer is given a lot more prominence and value, because it's been taught from very early university years as a business course that this is the value and importance of a marketing division. And it's then been, because it's been around for so long, it's held its value and prominence in organizations as that, future CEO has risen up the ranks. But as a design function, that is not taught to business graduates, be it a BBA or an MBA, of what the value of design is in an organization. That's not been as prominent as other functions like marketing and HR and so on and so forth. And so ultimately is kind of left as this gray area in the back of every senior leader's mind, that is design really that important and worthy and valuable to be, and have a seat at the table on the exco level, right? So that's kind of where I guess I'm really playing devil's advocate here and justifying or explaining why people think that and why that perception has built over time. But when exposed to high performing design functions, and this is, I'm referencing a startup that I'm now an advisor on, they primarily, like most organizations, had design under IT, right? Where the head of design reported to a CTO, and that's how that startup rolled for many years. And now it's at a point where the head of design has now been brought up, has a seat at the table as a chief design officer in the organization, and it's effectively created this org-wide acceptance and understanding of the value and importance of design, and how every business decision is driven through a design thinking practice and mindset, to the extent where even non-designers are now leaning in on this design thinking approach to solving problems, right? So it took time. It was a startup, right, run by a bunch of 20-year-olds who've obviously not seen the corporate life as much, and who've graduated from business programs in their universities. But because it was a much smaller organization, the value or the evangelization for R&D was a lot more easier and quicker to do, because there wasn't as much ground to cover as a 10,000 person organization. So that shift is happening, but it's happening at a slow rate, and it's happening in smaller orgs. But I think unless it doesn't happen in a much larger organization, then you don't get to, you actually see more hurdles and challenges than actual value, put out by these R&D teams, because it's not been accepted on a strategic level yet.
Yeah, I think your instincts to look to leadership to first have that in place before governance models and oversight can be achieved, I think is correct, right? Without having that person or that group with that ability to mandate and ability to control the design functions and to make sure things are being filtered through, and making sure that there's that level of accountability and there's that level of oversight, and that those standards and practices are being met. I don't know if it's possible. It doesn't seem. It seems like it's not, without having that top down presence, right? I'm going to actually quote the book that we've been discussing, which I think it really gets at exactly what we're talking about here. So the quote reads, so think about the main reason companies appoint a chief marketing officer, right? Companies have CMOs because they believe that marketing is critical to the success of business, right? There's a buy-in there. So therefore, they want it done with consistency and high quality across the entire organization. That's what the CMO position is telling the organization. That's part of its function, right? Is to make sure that there's that level of control and making sure that the quality is being met. And then they go on to say, try imagining what would happen if you axed your head of marketing and then scattered your marketing department around the company to work in a kind of an uncoordinated fashion. And if it's a rhetorical question, because the answer is chaos would ensue, right? And I feel like, unfortunately, I've walked into some organizations where that second part of, without even axing a CDO, a chief design officer, by building design or by bringing design into the organization through this more bottom-up mentality, you get these flat organizations with nobody at the top having any oversight really, and it just becomes this chaotic, simply mess of a way that the designers are organized throughout throughout the structure of the organization. And it seems like a simple solution, or to try, would be to kind of to buy into the leadership and to bring in an individual who could come in and really right the ship and really be that captain, so to speak, so that people know where to go, and people know the rules of the rules of the sea, and there's order and there's standards and practices being implemented. And also too, like, if there's ever a time when there's an issue that needs that crops up, and a problem and a fire that needs to be put out, you can go to you have a person to go to that has the ear of the C-suite, that has the ear of the CEO, to be able to really mandate changes and to correct wrongs that need to be corrected. Right. So it's, it's very political. It's a very political way of looking at it. But I think that without that, you're really dropping designers and researchers and people who come to organizations who want to be doing design, who want to be following these principles, and you're kind of just sending them out in a dinghy by themselves to try to like fight the hurricanes and keep afloat. And that's tough. I think we've all been there, but also I've been in organizations where there is a person, I think the organization that where we met, we did have a person who we looked to as a leader, who had a high level of seniority within the organization, and who had a lot of experience and background to know how to be a leader and to know how to do the work and to understand the different components and functions within an innovation or design team. And it really helped. I think it really helped things, and it was it made doing the work much more smoothly. But when you don't have that individual, things become can get quite rocky quite quickly. So I think, governance and leadership kind of mesh together well. And I think that is, as we'll see, I think when we get into maybe the other model that we're going to be analyzing and looking at, from how some other authors and thinkers are looking at how to make organizations design led, I think leadership is a fundamental core element that needs to get figured out and perfected and solved before the practice can really achieve maturity and really demonstrate value. To move on maybe to our last one, culture. This one's always tough, at least for me to talk about, because sometimes I don't even know what I'm talking about. When I mention culture, because it can mean a lot of things to different people. But from at least the author's point of view, they talk about culture as more of like hiring practices and bringing in the right kind of personalities and bringing in the right people who are trained in the right way. And then also having like a structure so that people are being rewarded for the work that they're doing and being promoted, and There's like, there's, a good management practice in place from a, and making sure that people who are being brought into the organization are understand design, are customer centric, these kinds of things. So maybe you want to talk more about how important you think culture is to transforming companies into being, design led.
Yeah. So I mean, I look at culture as, the thing that you do when nobody else is looking. Right. And the way I see it is that if you go back to the other 5 pieces that we discussed, strategy, understanding customers, design, measurement, and governance, I think all that put together is what ultimately could lead to a customer-centric culture within the organization. And without those pieces, if your culture itself is poor or lacking certain components for it to thrive and as a customer-centric organization, then it just impacts the other things, right? Like attracting the right kind of talent to work there, justifying what kind of training programs you put your employees through, and also even impacting the promotion ladder, because ultimately for you to get promoted, to say that you're doing a good job and here you go, here's a bigger salary and added responsibilities. Those responsibilities all need to tie back to, are we becoming a more customer-centric organization that ultimately grows the revenue and reduces the cost, or are we just purely focused on making money here because that's our bottom line and the user experience is a byproduct of what we do, right? So I think, and so some of the challenges I've often seen when hiring for top-notch R&D talent is that they often look at what kind of mentality or mindset is running the ship, and that if they claim to be customer-centric by just using that as a buzzword, but not really living out those values through, or not really living that out by having a customer-centric strategy in place, by having empowerment and a focus on research and design teams, by having metrics or measurements, that incorporate design metrics into an OKR model, or even having governance where you have a senior design background individual having a seat at the table at a C-suite point. If those elements are lacking, then attracting talent or attracting the right folks to join and really add on to that customer centricity becomes a challenge, right?
Not only just attracting, I think also identifying the right folks to bring in. Like if you don't, to me, it just really always goes back, it's seemingly to leadership and the problems that I've seen within the field with having the right types of lead. Listen, being a leader and being able to guide these research and development teams and understanding human-centered R&D, and being able to really be pushing for what's necessary and what's needed is, there's not a lot of individuals out there that can really do it well. And I think we need more and better senior leadership within UX and within design in bigger organizations. And I think when that gets in place, then those individuals can really create the culture. You talked about culture as, what people are doing, what you do when no one's looking. That's an interesting way of looking at it. For me, I think the culture gets set by senior leadership, how they interact with the business, what their skill set and, what they want to focus on, what they feel like is the best method, and what problems and what issues they want to be addressing, what methods and tools they want to bring in and use, and ultimately everything runs through them because they're they have the power of the purse, so to speak, right? So that always the buck has to stop somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And when the buck stops at the top, these are the individuals that really set the tempo and set the culture of how individuals are interacting within an organization, and how that design function interacts with other functions. And so, I mean, yeah, culture is tough to talk about sometimes, but I think you're right. I think looking at the other 5 and getting those right, I think the culture just kind of follows along. I don't know if it's you can to some degree, but I think culture I think it naturally forms when you get all the other pieces together. Maturity levels, trying to take the practice seriously, restructuring the business to be strategically kind of design led or customer centric. Having the right people come in from a research and design point of view, the culture then just gets kind of it's almost like it kind of happens naturally.
Yeah, because I mean, from my experiences when I've worked with teams that are trying to change the culture of an organization and trying to really set up or live out the values that have been set on a strategic level. Oftentimes there are certain organizational competencies that tend to be missing, that are a little bit more prescriptive in nature in terms of how to live out those values, or how to, what are some of those things that they're going to be measured by in terms of a cultural aspiration that the organization has. And those sort of rules, right, of values and competencies is often what we kind of base the culture fit discussion of when you're looking at your current employees or even hiring new talent, right? That does this person fit the culture that we're trying to build here, right? And if they don't, then it's because they don't, values of an organization you only really embody once you're in, right? But competencies is kind of your core behavior as an individual, right? That, are you ready to take on ownership? Are you, able to storytell and speak the language that we speak? A lot of these different things that could be said. And identifying individuals that kind of come with that pre-built is what ultimately defines whether a person is the right culture fit or not, right? Now, finding that kind of talent to fit into that ideal culture is getting easier day by day, because more and more organizations are kind of adopting those correct competencies and values. But to now change the culture within the organization would mean sort of creating, that level of change can be extremely difficult for some and extremely easy for others, right? Depending on what is it that you're changing about them, right? And some people are just not built to kind of live out that culture, right? And so then it becomes a more tricky, it becomes, a decision or a debate that happens of whether does that person continue to live here, or can we now provide training programs to help rewire them to conform to this customer-centric culture that we're trying to build, for us to continue to work together towards that goal.
Sounds very Orwellian to me about
I know, it's like, I mean, when I've spoken about this, when I've spoken about this to other people, they've asked me like, wait, are you just talking about brainwashing? I was like, no, I'm trying to undo the brainwashing that was done to them in the first place, because no normal human being would think that operating in this fashion is acceptable, right? Like then that's my view on that. And yeah, it can be a very difficult and tricky challenge to overcome, an org-wide cultural shift. But I think the ones that are smaller and more nimble and more flatter organizations tend to do better in this sense. But ultimately, it's I wouldn't say it's necessarily a top down or a bottom up. I think it's all everywhere in between, right? That yes, you'll have the strategic support from the top down, but
Yeah, I think that's the key. I think for me, it's just having a presence, and having an ability to have somebody to go to, if something's not going the right way, to come down and correct it, or to say, hey, we've bought into this specific methodology, or we've bought into this specific way of working. It's not happening on this team. If you have nobody to go to
Consult.
help consult, or to come down and actually, crack the whip, then you're just going to have people walk all over you, and nobody should be asked to, as an individual, to get brought onto a team to be said, okay, we're going to be working this way, and then having a person kind of not work that way, but because they're the lead, or because they're the highest paid person in the room, or they speak the loudest, or whatever it is, they just kind of dominate and change all the things that people have agreed on already.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to run to somebody to say, this is not going to work. If you don't have that authority in place, I think then it becomes very easy to get off track.
Look at it slightly differently, right? Like the way I see it is that if the strategy doesn't exist, then the culture won't, right? And if the strategy does exist, that now culture has a foot in the door, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that the culture is now there and it's set in place. It's got a foot in the door that it now needs to further flourish and imbued in the wider organization based on the overall strategy that's been put in place. So
who would you say owns the strategy, though?
Oh, that is your C-level, your C-suite, right? If you had to put one man or woman behind it, it'd be the CEO, right? They would ultimately be the driving force of that strategy, which would influence how that culture grows. But ultimately, it's not the C-suite's job to drive the culture or build the culture, rather. They will only handle the strategy part, right? The culture is what's built throughout the organization by individuals or by teams that are responsible for building out this culture, right? Which is what kind of goes back to my point, right? Culture is what you do when nobody's looking. That it's the strategy is sort of the hard rules that you set in place, and the culture is what is the way of life that you define based on those rules to live by, right? That's how I tend to look at it, and so it's kind of left to the employees, the teams, the folks across the group to define and live out that culture that ultimately lines up with the strategy. Now, of course, you can have a dedicated team that's purely responsible for just the culture, right? We've seen that before. But in the absence of that, it does not mean that the culture is now just left for a toss, waiting for people to come in and interpret it like some ancient tablet that we dug up, which was the strategy set millions and millions of years ago. There is an underlying responsibility that each person has to be able to interpret that strategy and define those kind of values and competencies to live by if they've not been done before by a dedicated team or individual. But simply saying that we're customer-centric just for the sake of saying that and then not doing any actions that reflect that is basically saying you've got a nice little strategy in place, but the culture does not exist because nobody's owned that culture to flesh it out, right? And I think that's just an excuse for not having a customer-centric culture, because it's everybody's responsibility to live it out, right? This is why I say I don't see it as a purely top-down thing. I don't see it as a purely bottom-up thing either. I think it's everywhere in between. That culture is meant to be brought to the table based on what is the strategy we want to achieve. And if you've got the other pieces in place, it only further empowers the culture to move forward, right? Strategy allows culture to have a foot in the door, but it's everything else that really pulls culture in from the outside to come in. Okay, that's a nice play on the word outside in. Bring really helps to bring the culture into the organization and now finally allow it to flourish and become the way of life for everyone.
I think when you start talking about culture, you can start. It can be very easy to start getting into having things sound very fluffy and intangible and hard to really pin down. But I mean, one of the ways I think, I don't know if there's just one way to really get at culture and what it means and how to make it better or how to make it worse. But like a way to look at it, at least what my intuition to look at to how I would want to, if I was to ask the question, how do I know that a company has a good culture versus a bad one? One of the ways you can look at it would just be, are the people who are working there, do they feel, not so much are they happy, because I don't know if that's the best way of looking at a situation where people have to go in to do to do work, but are they fulfilled? Are individuals on a day-to-day basis really fulfilled? Are they doing meaningful work? Do they understand their role? Do they understand the value that they're providing? Are they engaged with the work? Are they engaged with the company? Do they believe in the core values? Do they believe in the direction of the company and what it ultimately is trying to do, or what it ultimately its place within society? I think that is really how you define out culture, and how people feel, how people, when they reflect on if they like the culture or not, those types of questions and those types of ways of looking at those types of things matter, and are ways to demonstrate that the culture is either a good culture or a bad culture. So, it goes back to, like, if we're talking about design, and if you're having, a lot of times I've seen designers and I've seen researchers, interacting with others and trying to, and really feeling a lot of pain about what their role is and why they're there. And I think it's senior leadership's job to really help make the case, tell the story, as to, especially for more junior level people, what they're doing, why they're doing it, how their work is contributing to the overarching strategy of the business. If that's not being constantly articulated, if people are coming into work and not sure why they're there, I believe that's a cultural problem. So to me, what the way to solve the cultural question, or the way to answer the cultural question, is this a good culture? Is this a bad culture? Is, can people tell a good story to themselves about having meaning at work, coming in and knowing their role and knowing that they're contributing to the greater good of the company being successful, and hopefully that greater good and the company being successful means creating a bigger, broader impact in the world, so to speak. And I think that most of the time, successful companies are making positive impacts in the world. That's why they're successful, right? So it really starts at the top of that strategy and works all the way down to the lowest possible interns, knowing that when they show up at work, it may be hard. It may, they may have to do things they don't want to do, or, bite their tongue, or how whatever it is that you have to do to be a good employee, which is sometimes, not do the thing that you ultimately want to do, but do the thing that you need to do. But at the very least, they know why they're doing that thing. And I think it's senior leadership's job to, if a person doesn't know that, I think it's senior leadership's jobs to help a person know that. And if they can't answer that question for them, it's they have to take that brunt, that responsibility to change the culture, to change the structure of the organizations, so that that person does feel like they know why they're there.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you on that.
So on that note, I think that does allows us to wrap up this episode, specifically kind of outlining and detailing outside in, and how the authors look at I would say, transforming organizations to being more customer-centric or being more, I would say, looking at making sure that the customer experience is something that's baked into the DNA of an organization. And I think that that's something that we as UX professionals really have to start taking seriously. And it's important for us, for our profession and our field to grow and mature, and for us to help us demonstrate value. I think we really do need. I think that's one of the key points to take out from this conversation is, for us to be successful, we need to make sure that the organizations that we work in want us to be successful.
Yeah. No, 100%. And that
Anything else to close?
I think this book Outside In kind of really summarizes all the core ingredients needed for an organization to be successful if they are obsessed with customer experience and customer success and customer centricity. Honestly, I can't think of anything else that could be added onto these 6 pillars. I think it's comprehensive in the sense that these are all individually required, and that they all sort of play onto each other and leverage each other pillars. What each pillar brings to the table, and to say that you're an organization that has 3 out of 6 of these does not necessarily mean you're customer centric. You've got to have all 6 of them, kind of like the Infinity Gauntlet. Got to have all 6 of them to really snap your finger and bring about change.
Mm-hmm. All right. Sounds good. So until I guess the next, I have a feeling that this business value of UX is going to just to be a thread that's going to be running through probably most of our conversations, and certainly something that I want to, when we start getting guests on, getting their take, because, at this juncture of this stage of the development of UX, I feel like a lot of these questions are open, and we want to have a multitude of voices to hear and to think about and to analyze and to ultimately decide on which ones make the most sense. So,
absolutely.
All right. Until next time. Thank you all for listening in. This is Mustafa Ahmed and Chris Covell signing off. We're going to be putting up the episode out pretty actually. Yeah. So if you haven't tuned into some of our previous episodes, now is a good time. Check us out on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you hear about UX, you should probably find us there.
That's a wrap for this episode of UX. If you want to stay up to date with Chris and Mustafa's latest episodes, be sure to subscribe to the show and leave them a review on your favorite podcast platform. It helps other listeners find the podcasts and join in on the conversation. And don't forget to check the line notes to follow the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn for behind-the-scenes content, updates, access to comment boards, and sneak peeks of upcoming episodes. Thanks for listening to UX, and we'll see you next time for some more insights into the ever-evolving world of user experience.